Hi everybody, Carmen here with Quality Sewing, and for this week's How Do I, we are going to talk about how do I select fabric so that my quilt goes together nicely, okay? So I don't know about you, but I love piecing, okay? I love taking all of the fun colors, putting them all together and making a quilt top. But I know sometimes that whole process can seem intimidating, or maybe you're just like, I'm not sure if I have the right colors, or maybe you're new to quilting and you're like, I'm kind of overwhelmed and I don't even know where to start because I don't want to take all this time and piece something all together and then be like, oh wow, that was not what I was hoping for. So today we're going to talk through some things around color, around prints, and some tips that I have that I find useful when I'm putting a quilt top together or when I'm picking fabric for something. And as many of you know, as I'm sure all of you know, there are like thousands and thousands and thousands of like different types and colors and prints of fabric out there. So of course, so much of this is also just your personal preference because some of us love bright fabrics, some of us love dark fabrics, right? There's all these beautiful different types of fabrics out there. So the first thing we're going to talk about today is color, just in general. And we're going to talk about the color wheel because this seems sort of basic, but it is really helpful when you're thinking about putting a quilt together. So you have the color wheel up there, you can see it on this screen. And of course you have, red, orange, yellow, green, blue. You have your primary colors, which are going to be red, blue, and yellow. And then you have your secondary colors, which are going to be purple, green, and orange. And the reason why it's helpful to think about a rainbow is most of us are drawn to rainbows, and rainbows look pretty, and those colors all together are often inspiring. And when you can think about sort of the rainbow of colors, even when you're just picking a color or a few colors and using them in that manner together can make them look really good. So if we go back here and look at the fabric I have, you can see here here's a rainbow. That same rainbow that you saw on the wheel, I have it here as well. And the reason why I show this is because look how pretty it looks together, right? You've got your red, orange, orange, yellow, green, your darker green. This is like the yellow green, your blue green, blue, and then you have your purple, and then your regular purple. This is the blue purple, and then your red purple. So you can sort of see how pretty all of those are together. And as you imagine, if you were to even pick sections of this, each of these different sections would also look really pretty together. And so the other thing to think about when we're thinking about color is warm colors versus cool colors. So we have a nice little chart here that shows you what those are, right? Your warm colors are going to be your yellows, your oranges, your pinks, okay? And then you have your cool colors, and you'll notice that some of them can go either way, right? Like for instance, red is one where oftentimes when I'm picking red, I really want to look at it and think, well, do I want the cool red that has more blue tones in it? Or do I want the warm red that has more orange tones in it? Because how it's going to look in your quilt is going to be wildly different depending on if most of the quilt is warm versus most of the quilt is cool. Or of course, you can always mix warm and cool colors together. But sometimes one method for making a quilt is you can put all cool colors together. So like if we flip back here and you look at like the quilt behind us, this has a lot of cool colors with a couple of warm mixed in with white, right? And so there's like an example of how you can put some different colors together. This really only has a couple of colors, right? We're just here in this family of colors, but putting them all together like that with different shades of blues and greens with that white, it really pops and it looks really beautiful. Okay, and then the final color thing that I want to talk about is complementary colors. Because sometimes when we're thinking about like, well, which colors are going to look good together? I really have no idea. You can go back to the basics and just think about complementary colors, right? So red and green are Christmas colors, holiday colors. Those are complementary colors. That's part of the reason why they look so good together. Or you have purple and yellow, right? Those are complementary colors. They look great together. Blue and orange complementary. You can see right here on this wheel showing you that so when you want to like go across the spectrum, you can really see how some of those colors work nicely together, and that can be another tool. There are lots of different color theories and things, and we're not going to go deep into it, but if you want more information on color, we do have this great book called Color Basics for Makers, and this book is a great one, and it has lots of great tips in here about using color and color value, and all sorts of good stuff. And so if you find color really challenging, I'd highly recommend getting a book like this. This one's called Color Basics for Makers because it can be for quilting. It can be for any time you're putting colors together. But having a tool like this can be helpful when you're trying to figure out how to get those colors together. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about color. Now let's talk about the fabric itself and patterns and some of the tips that I have. So one, if you are brand new and you're like, I have no idea where to start, I highly recommend picking a quilt that you can use some sort of pre-cut bundle to work with. So maybe it is a quilt that asks for 10 fat quarters, so you can get a fat quarter bundle. Or maybe it's something that calls for a charm pack. But a lot of pre-cut bundles, like you can see here, we have some pre-cut fat quarters, and these are all solids, but look, they're already in a rainbow of like all pinks that work really beautifully together. Or like here, we have one of these pre-cut tulas, and you can see that once again, they have it in a rainbow, but all of these colors and prints, I don't know if you can see them, Braille, maybe you can see them better if I put it down here. All of these colors and prints are going to work, if I can get them to like peel apart, are going to work really, really well together. And so sometimes if you're newer to quilting, picking one of these pre-cut packs, there's big ones, there's little ones, like this one, also once again, sort of a rainbow of colors, but in the blues and the greens and the creams, right? But all of these are going to work nicely together. And then there are also these jelly rolls as well that come in strips, and all of these strips, you can sort of see the different colors here. These are also all going to work really well together. So if you have never made a quilt before and you're like, okay, I just want to get some fabric that I love and I really want it to work well together because I haven't had to done this process, getting something that is pre-cut, that is already a collection that has some blenders in there, some patterns that are big and small, all of that good stuff, so you don't have to do any of the real work. You're still going to need to pick a color for your borders and a color for your bindings, that kind of thing. But a lot of times that can be a great way to get started where you don't sort of feel overwhelmed. Another way that a lot of people get started when they're thinking about making a quilt is they do something like they have a quilt book or they have a quilt pattern and they say, you know what, I want to make this quilt. Okay, and so then you follow the instructions and you get what it requires. For this quilt, it wants 10 different colors. Okay, so a lot of times, if you're like me, when you buy fabric, you don't always buy fabric because you have a purpose, right? You buy fabric because you're like, oh my gosh, that's so cute, I need this fabric. You have no idea what you're gonna do with it. You buy it, you toss it in your stash, and you're like, okay, one of these days, I'm gonna make something with it. And a lot of times, it can be something that is a pretty wild print, right? Something that could be a focus fabric. And a lot of times you're like, well, you know what, I love this fabric, or I know who I'm going to give this to. Like this fabric, I don't know if you can see it in here. I'll put it down here so you can see. This fabric I think is super fun because there's pterodactyls. Let me get up here where you can see the pterodactyl. There are pterodactyls like woven in to this really fun floral. This is a Tula pink, and she makes really fun fabric. And so like maybe you're like, oh, I know somebody would love this, and so I want to make them a quilt with this really fun fabric. So maybe a lot of times, I think a lot of us start with something like this. We're like, we know we want to make a quilt, and this is our inspiration piece, our inspiration fabric. So now how do I find 9 other colors that work well with this, that are going to work well for this quilt that I have here? Now every quilt, right, every quilt that you make is going to be a little bit different based on the style of quilt, right? Like if you pick a quilt like the one behind me that has a lot of white in it, then clearly you're gonna buy a solid white and then you're gonna mix the colors around. This one is one where everything has about an equal weight as far as size, right? This particular quilt, they're all the same, the blocks are, all the sizes of the fabric are very similar throughout. So we know we can just sort of pick colors that work well together but have a theme. So one of the things that the fabric manufacturers do that is super helpful is they put here on the edge, and I'll put this here on this camera so you can see it, they put right here on the edge, move some stuff, they put all of the different colors that are in this fabric. And what's brilliant about that is then when you're trying to find colors that match your fabric that are going to work well, you know that if you pick anything that are sort of in these families here, it's probably going to look pretty good with this fabric. And so this can be a really nice thing to take with you to the fabric store, because I think a lot of us, what we do is we have one of these like inspirational pieces, and then we're like, okay, I have my great fun fabric, now I'm going to go back to the fabric store and I'm going to get the rest of it. Because maybe you have a couple of other pieces at home, but you don't have enough to complete the whole quilt, right? To actually make all those blocks. So you can, behind me here, and I'm going to move this over. Behind me here, you can see I have, I'll pull these forward. I picked out some different fabrics here that all really work beautifully with this fabric. And you can sort of see here, one of the things I like to do is lay my fabric that I'm really excited about, right, as my inspiration on it. And you can see how all of these different fabrics really go nicely with this fabric, right, which is super fun. And you can also see that I have thought about the rainbow, right? So I decided that the colors I was most excited about in here were the blues, the pinks, and the purples. And you can sort of see I've done sort of a rainbow, and I've added a couple of fabrics that have a little bit more white, because I know these ones are going to be really dark, right, and really heavy. And so I want my quilt, since I have that pattern here, right, that I'm playing with, I know that I want to have some light and some dark pieces flowing throughout it. And so I have picked colors that match inside this family of blues, inside this family of pinks, and then the purples that sort of, once again, read like a rainbow, right? But are just connected to this fabric. Does that make sense? And then the other thing that is really important to think about is pattern. So depending on the size of your blocks, the pattern you pick is really critical. For instance, because this fabric here has those cute little pterodactyls, I'm going to need to make sure when I use this fabric that I'm going to use it with a big, I need to make sure that I'm cutting it into a big spot, because if I'm only using it for a little 1-inch block or something, as you might imagine, no one's ever going to tell there's a pterodactyl in here, right? So I want to make sure that my pattern matches sort of, my quilt pattern matches the fabric that I'm doing, in the sense of like, how big do I want, how much of the pattern do I want to see, you know? And then also, if I know that I really want to highlight this fabric, and then I picked a second one that I really liked in here to really highlight this guy right here, then the rest of these, even though they're not solids, they all have a little bit of a pattern. They're going to read more like solids. And all of these little ones, which a lot of times these would be called blenders, because there's just like little stars in this one. There's just there's small patterns here. These can be cut into very small shapes or very big shapes. And they're still going to sort of, they'll read like as a solid, but they have a little bit of activity in them, where a lot of times for your main, if there's a fabric you really love, you want to make sure you're using like a bigger piece of it. And sometimes picking your fabrics here are also going to be really connected to what size quilt you're trying to make, like what size block, and how the pieces of the block work together. So let's look at some other quilts here. So here is another one that is, Reva made this one, and Reva and I both love similar things. We really love white in quilts, you know, because I think white really makes all the other colors pop. But you can see here, most of the colors here are in that blue, green, gray family. We've got a little bit of chartreuse, and all of the prints are a very similar size. We have one that has a bit larger print. I don't know if you can see it here. Let's put this here so you can sort of see a little bit closer. There you go. So you can see here we have one that has a bit larger print, but most of these have pretty small prints, because all of these pieces are pretty small, but you can still see all of the different colors, and it looks a lot different now that we're close up to it, right, than when it looked further away. Sort of fun because they read more solid a little bit when they're further away, and then you get close and you can see how all of those colors work together, where you have light, you have dark, and then of course you have the white, which really offsets the quilt. Okay, now we're going to grab one that's like totally different, completely wild. This guy here is totally different style of quilt, right? So this guy has a lot of different colors. We've got oranges and greens, and you can see we have this one truly uses, if I drop this down here so you can see, this guy uses really true solids, right, over here, so you can really see like the almost like sunshines that are here, and then some more wild prints. But this quilt would look drastically different if we had picked the colors to pick the fabrics you love, and then you get to put them together to make these gorgeous quilts. And then here's one that is much more of like a scrap quilt, where there's all of these different big pieces, and you can see here where we have some larger prints. It works really well because the block size is a lot bigger. Let me drop that one down here. My arm out of the way, right? Like how cute is that? Also, and then I'm drawing my last quilt on the ground. Okay, here is one that's a fun one. Here we go with those complementary colors. We have all very Christmas, right? Red and green and white, super cute. But even here, when you get closer, you can see that some of these have much bigger prints than others, right? You have some very small prints, some larger prints, but the prints themselves also really change how it looks, right? Very fun. And then the last one, this guy is big, so I'm gonna hold him up here. This guy, instead of using white, is using gray as the background, and has once again just picked like the blue and green tones. You can sort of see a theme here of colors that that we like, lots of blues and greens, and you can see the size of these, once again, the smaller prints. And you can see that for a lot of quilting, something with a smaller print is probably going to serve you better, whereas some of the big wild prints, you're going to want to save those for spots where you have bigger blocks, or maybe you have some part of your quilt where you can feature it. So maybe you put a big wide border around that has that featured fabric that has a big print, because you can make your borders really big if you want. Okay, so I think that is everything that I have for you. I don't have any more quilts hiding back there. I wanted to make sure I didn't drop any more on the ground. So I hope this was helpful. What I highly recommend doing is when you are trying to match fabric, bring all your fabrics into the fabric store with you at Quality Sewing. We have quite a few different quilting cottons, and they are different at our different store locations, which is sort of fun. So even if you normally shop at one, but you happen to be driving by another, pop in, because they might have a whole different selection of fabric, because there are so many different types of quilting fabric. We can't have them all in every store location, so we do mix up what's at the different stores. But you want to bring in, if you have a piece like this that you're inspired by, bring it with you, so that way you can use the color swatches at the bottom, but then also that way you can stack them up. This is the other thing that I highly recommend doing, is stack them all up, because then you can really see how they're going to look together, mix and match them, make sure all of them really work well, and your quilt will be beautiful. And of course, you could always ask any team member to help you out as well. So good luck and happy quilting.